Coming up on today's episode.
I mean, I reached out to Jeff Lorber very early on and Dave Cos very early on and sent them some demos, and they were like, this is great, but, you know, you're still young and it still needs a bit of refining and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, even then I was a bit like, and, you know, these guys have got very, very good careers and I want a piece of this if I can. Just, yeah, like you say, the personnel on that record was so strong. The Brothers Johnson on there, Greg Phillinganes, yeah, just, man, I mean, just the star-studded. For me, it was like, that's the best of the best. Well, yeah, but who knows what's the nth degree of AI? Like, it could actually be a part of a live show. I mean, we already see that singers use auto-tune on live shows all the time.
Chatting Tracks, let's talk music.
Hi, it's Robbie, it's Chatting Tracks. Let's talk music indeed. Welcome along to today. Now, what I love about this channel is it's all about music. There's no one genre. It's about finding new artists, talking about music, and just spreading the music love. Today, we're diving into the world of smooth jazz, and I've got a special treat for you today. Now, if you're a fan of this genre, you're more likely heard the soulful and creative melodies of this man already. He's amazing. He's a maestro on the keys. He's a master of rhythm. He's a true gem in the world of smooth jazz. His name is Ollie Silk. He's a British keyboardist and recording artist. He's been enchanting audiences worldwide. He's constantly on tour with his unique blend of jazz, funk, and R&B. His journey from a self-taught pianist to a celebrated artist in the world of smooth jazz is nothing more than inspiring. It's brilliant. You're going to love this interview. In today's video, we'll explore Ollie's musical journey, his biggest hits, and what makes his sound so irresistible. We'll also get a glimpse into his creative process. Here's some of his exclusive stories, and they're amazing, from his career, and we'll discover what's next for this amazing artist. So sit back, relax, and let the smooth sounds of Ollie take you to another musical journey that you've never been to before. So don't forget, hit that subscribe button and click on the icon bell so you never miss our future episodes about smooth jazz. I'll see you on the next one.
If we can just go back a bit, was there a lot of music in your house growing up? Were your parents heavily into music?
Yeah, absolutely they were. My brother especially, because he's about 10 years older than me. So he was heavily into jazz, funk and soul, I guess you would say. And when I was about 4 years old, I suppose, he started work. I mean, you couldn't do it nowadays, but he started working at a record shop when he was 13. So, yeah, definitely child labour going on there. But he worked at Rayners Lane Record Centre in West London. And, yeah, man, I mean, he was like a proper anorak. Real vinyl head from a young age as well. So he had a really nice turntable, and he used to come, you know, because he got first access to all the imported vinyls and stuff. So he always used to come home. I think it was a Monday they got delivered from the US, and so he'd go through them, you know, and pick the ones that he wanted, and then he'd come home and then he'd just be playing music constantly. So yeah, all I ever heard was, gosh, like everything from all the soul singers at the time, from, you know, Luther and Jeffrey Osborne and Freddie Jackson and those guys, but also like, you know, Jeff Lorber and George Duke and all the jazz guys as well. So that was sort of like just going through the house all the time. So I suppose that was really just soaking in all the time, you know.
And can you remember what record it was that made you sort of turn around and go, you know, what's that instrument? How does it work? And I want to do that. Can you remember which one that would be?
Oh, man, many, but I can think of things like, I mean, I was born in 79, so I can think of things like, apparently The Dude by Quincy Jones was the one that, because my parents bought me a little record deck when I was like 2, like a real deal record deck. And so, again, they would buy the singles of the day and bring them home and teach me how to put the needle on and things. I was only tiny. And my first records was Einstein A Go-Go by Landscape. Do you remember that one?
I do, yeah.
Einstein A Go-Go. So I used to bop around to that one. Tiger Feet by Mud, and then The Dude, which was obviously something my brother brought home. What was that, 81, end of 81 or something? So I was only like, I wasn't even sort of 3 yet. And I used to get down to that. So like that's really special to me because, I don't know, when you're that age, you don't remember those times specifically, but like there's just something about that record that it just makes me picture my childhood, you know. That's really special. So all those songs to me were the special ones. But like, yeah, I mean, even like cameo records, like She's Strange and stuff like that, like all the synth work in there, was really like, man, I just dug it so much that, you know, that's really what, I mean, it didn't start me playing the keyboards. I started playing in about 85, just silly, like messing around on a little tiny keyboard. But I didn't play seriously till about 1990, actually. But all through the 80s, I guess I was cutting my teeth. I just didn't really even know it then because I didn't play. But I was just so heavily into music. Even when house music came along, you know, I was only 8 years old, really, 8 or 9 years old. But like when that sort of crossed over into the charts, I really loved it. My ears went straight for that. And I guess it was the slightly more soulful, jazzy side of the house music phenomenon that really caught my attention. And then when I started playing when I was like 11, immediately sort of just wanted to try and play. What the hell were they doing? I want to try and play that stuff, you know.
That's amazing. For people that haven't heard it, I'll put a link to the Dude album from Spotify in the description, because I think what I love about the album, like you were saying, is it's got amazing playing on it. The songwriting's great, but it's got a lot of character as well. So there's and he goes, "Who is it? It's the dude." Well, that's enough, and it's just got Quincy saying his name.
I don't think there's anything really, but just such a great mix of songs. Really, like Patty Austin was just amazing. Like that was for me was like her peak. And Rod Temperton wrote some stuff there. Just like you say, the personnel on that record was so strong. The Brothers Johnson on there. Greg Phillinganes, just man, I mean, just the star-studded. For me, it was like that's the best of the best, like at the top of their game as well, including the mix engineers and the producers and everything about it. Just a beautiful album. A bit like Off the Wall and Thriller. Really, I'll put those three very much. You know, I know they were a few years apart, but they're all very similar because they're just so well rounded. Those three albums.
It's amazing as well that you mentioned Rod Temperton there, because he was a little tiny white guy from Yorkshire.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. He talked like this. I mean, I met him quite a few times, Rod, and lovely fella. But really, he just would never, ever assume that he was anything to do with music, because they'd be there out the back of a gig smoke. Oh, bloody hell. All right, mate. Yeah. Just absolutely not affected at all by anything, you know, anything Hollywood or anything like that. But really told it like it was. But when it came to, I don't know. I mean, I never spent time in the studio with him, but I've got a lot of close friends who did, and I just can't quite imagine how he would come up with those top lines. You know, being that he was a smoky northerner. You know?
And obviously he was in Heatwave as well. He wrote for Heatwave. Yeah,
absolutely brilliant,
absolutely genius songwriter.
Yeah, like one of the most complete songwriters of all time, I
think. He's brilliant. So you went straight to piano there. Were you self-taught, or did you sort of get lessons in the end?
I got from 1990. Finally, I got. Actually, I was already doing like stuff on stage, like acting and singing chorus line stuff when I was a kid, amateur dramatic stuff. Anyway, I finished my first production. Local here, which was pretty intense. It was actually a week long of like a show every night. And even though I only had a small part in it and I would do all the chorus line stuff, it was like for a 10-year-old, it was pretty full on. But anyway, I completed that, and as a gift, my parents bought me my first sort of decent Yamaha keyboard that had all the like drum pads on and stuff like that. So I set about kind of starting to really play, and I'll backtrack slightly there, because my parents owned a health club in Camberley, which is close to where we are, Camberley, Surrey. They'd taken on a health club, which they had for a couple of years. Unfortunately, it didn't work out in the end, but it was when they had it was wicked. It was like a 2-story health club. They had a gym on the top, and then they had this huge social lounge downstairs with a massive bar and a restaurant, and they had a grand piano in there. And so, you know, in the off hours, you know, like first thing in the morning, if they took me to work, or later on at night, I'd just sit there and prat around on the piano. And, you know, it was very simple stuff, but I already then could feel like, looking back now, I knew how to find my way around sort of improvisation and stuff. Very, very simple, but like I knew how to do it. Anyway, one of my dad's friends at the time, who was a contractor, who was helping, because my dad was a builder and a contractor. He was also a piano player from old, and I remember there was a day where they was sitting there having lunch, and I was just messing around, And he heard me and he said to my dad, he can play, he's got something there. Maybe you should search for a teacher locally. So sure enough, they did. That we called him up sort of a week later, and he just said, could you play something down the phone? And so I sat there. I didn't really know what I was going to play. Didn't play any particular song. I just flapped around again. And he said, oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, I'll take you on. So I started lessons with him, and that was the end of 1990. And that was kind of, they were like electronic keyboard lessons. It wasn't like classical training at all. It wasn't anything like that. It was kind of a newfangled thing because the Royal College of Music had just started a syllabus for electronic keyboard. So up to then they'd only had piano, straight up like old school. And now finally they kind of moved into the electronic world, and they had this syllabus of like 4 exams for electronic keyboard specifically. And so this teacher, Colin, he started me on that syllabus, which was cool. So actually kind of rather than just, reading a piece of music and learning the techniques of sort of sight reading and playing, it was much more about like, what sounds do you use in a composition? How can you change sound? I mean, again, 10 years old, so it's kind of simple, but what sounds can you use? How you can change patches to different sounds and things like that. Using the correct like rhythms and things like that. So just like knowing your way around a keyboard. And there was also harmony and melody stuff in there as well, but it was kind of more of a complete electronic keyboard exam. So I ended up doing all those. And then at the same time, running concurrently, they had a musical workshop. So every year we would do a stage show for charity. So it was kind of half the year would be doing your exam, and then the other half of the year would be building up to this sort of extravaganza, local charity extravaganza, which would be half keyboard players all at the back. So there'd be like 8 keyboard players in this horseshoe shape, and then loads of dancers. I mean, we're all between the ages of 10 and 16. So yeah, and all these dancers, and we just do show tunes. But so that's what I learned to play, was all the sort of show tunes and pop tunes and, film soundtrack tunes of the time, to then do every year we do this charity thing. So that was my teaching, but never had any official like jazz teachings or anything like that. That just didn't come till a bit later when I kind of taught myself, really.
Amazing. It's like my dad played in a band, and he was a drummer, and I wanted to play drums. I'm fascinated by people's journeys to their instrument. And he said to me, I said, Dad, can you teach me? And he said, no, because you'll play exactly like me. So he said, I don't know if he was trying to tell me he's rubbish or he was. But he was, in my opinion, he was a fantastic drummer, my dad.
Oh, right, it's okay.
Yeah, and he said, just get your favourite records and learn those, and then you'll develop your own style. And I think that's the way he did it, because it would have been the 1950s when he was learning to drum.
Yeah,
and I just love people's approaches, and it's just interesting how you played it down the phone, and then it's just people find their way to an instrument if they're meant to, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. When you think back of it, it's like just what there's so many what ifs. What if I hadn't have done that? If I hadn't had that teacher, I may have gone into a completely different direction on the keyboards. There's just so many. But that's the beauty of life, isn't it?
So a little later on, you have the band Sugar and Silk. But were you in anything previous to that? Was you any sort of pub bands? Were you sort of?
Yeah, I was in a few. After I finally left the sort of musical workshop crew when I was 16, I left school at that time, obviously, and went to college. And then whilst I was at college, I was doing music, which at that time, academia was clearly not for me. I was a bit of a naughty boy. I was a bit of a tearaway. So I only lasted a year in college, and then they kicked me out. But within that year, the great thing is that I made great connections with proper musicians, because up to then, you do music in school, you do GCSE music, and that's, it was great, and that was a good experience, but you're not really sort of proactively working with other kids at school at that point. You're just a bit too young, I think. And it wasn't until college, and it was like, wow, there's active musicians who want to do stuff outside of the curriculum, and it was amazing. I mean, I'm still really good friends with lots of those people that I met when I was sort of 16, 17, and we started music class. I think I've got to say, though, out of about 40, even though I got kicked out after a year, they all completed their music A-levels. I think I might be one of two that became a professional musician out of all of them, which is hilarious. You know, they were brilliant. They were great classical players, all of them, you know, and they'd studied really well. They could all play two instruments and violin and piano. But like, I don't know, I just get a feeling it wasn't really in their blood. They were just, you know, that it was just another thing they did. So they went through college and then they just sort of dropped it. They were very academic. They went on to do other things, whereas like it was proper in, you know, it was within me. I needed to do music. And so, yeah, the ones that also shared that outlook, there was about 4 of us. We ended up sort of just getting together outside, you know, in practice rooms and things like that. And then we decided to form a soul band. That was the first one. It was called Soul Intoxication, and there was about 9 of us. It was a nightmare to try and logistically. You got like 9 or 10 17 to 19-year-olds. You know, we're all like, all we want to do is party and have fun and mess around. And like, you've got a couple of responsible ones there who are trying to keep the band going, get everyone to learn the music, you know, try and sort the arrangements out, and then we're all just messing around all the time. But anyway, we did actually manage to do some gigs, and they were great. And I look back on it, and it was really good. It was really the first time that I'd actually done, you know, gigs for money, you know. And so we did it. We probably did about a year of that. And various local gigs and stuff like that. I mean, gosh, it was like 20 quid each you walked away with, you know, it was like crazy. But it was such a good experience. And then within that group was Danny Sugar, was bass player, and him and I had already like hit it off, and we had a lot of the same sort of influences. We played a lot together within the band, but also outside of that. And then once we disbanded the Soul group, I think the Soul group carried on, but it kind of changed, you know, personnel. We moved on. I got kicked out of college. I started working, and I worked. I did a day job for I think the next probably 5 years before I became a pro. Various jobs, but all the time I was working with Danny. Me and Danny were kind of messing around, but again, it was still messing around. It was nothing serious really in our mind. But I landed a job. Eventually, I was like an agency worker. They put me in everywhere, you know. Alfred Marks. I don't know if you remember Alfred Marks.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, you remember? Yeah. Alfred Marks became a deco, I think it was called, when I was working for them. Anyway, they eventually, after a string of terrible jobs, they got me into Diners Club, the credit card company, the old school. Which was in Farnborough, which is where I lived at the time, Farnborough in Hampshire, and they had their UK headquarters in right in the centre of Farnborough. And they, so I landed a job there working on their credit card machines, like fixing credit card machines remotely, and also ringing merchants up who were interested in accepting Diners Club cards. Almost cold calling. You know, but it was pretty rough. It was a rough job, but the money was great. You know, on from making like minimum wage kind of thing to all of a sudden it was decent money. We used to do overtime on the weekends. It was like triple pay. So I was like, even though I disliked the work, I was like, I'm on a good thing here, you know, so let's do it. Let's save some money. So I ended up working there for about 6 months. And at the end of that 6 months, I had enough money to buy my first Mac, my first Apple Mac. And it was the end of 1998. And I bought my first Mac. It was something like $3,500 even back then. You can imagine now that's like probably 10 grand, maybe more. But it was a computer, and you could plug a bass in the front and it sounded good. You could record it, and I could have all my keyboards MIDI'd up to it. So I got my little studio going in my bedroom. And we started recording stuff, again, with no, you know, we didn't have any designs on whether we would, you know, make a record or get a deal or anything like that. Just made some songs and used some loops and bass down, put some keys down. And I think we had maybe 3 or 4 songs. And I don't really remember how it ended up. It ended up getting in front of a UK company called Time Warp Records. I think it might have been through my brother, who I mentioned earlier, who was into music, and he was kind of doing some music management at that time. I think it was through him. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, they heard it. And they were like, we love this. This is great. You know, what's this band? And we were like, I don't know. No idea. We haven't got a name or anything. It was, oh, can you do a whole album for us? We'll put it out in the UK and Europe. So like, cool. Okay. So we went with the name Sugar and Silk, seemed obvious. And we set about finishing a record in record time as well, because another thing that was going on at the time was I'd just won a competition. This is kind of random. Yeah, I don't mind me going on about this.
No, do it. Yeah.
I just almost exactly the same time as we got this record deal, I won a competition in the back of Melody Maker, I think, or NME, one of the papers. I'd won a competition with another friend of mine to do 7 months DJing in Ibiza club, and it was you had to send your mixtapes in, and my mate was sort of an MC. I say that loosely. He wasn't like a ragger MC or anything like that. It was like just a bit of a hype guy, you know. And we, you know, it was just a short demo we did with him on the mic, me playing some big beat at the time. I think it was Norman Cook, and that, you know, that was massive at the time. Bentley River Mason, all that stuff. And so it was just me playing that stuff, a little bit of a mix here and there, a couple of sort of housey tunes, and him over the top. And we won out of about 2,500 entries. We took it down. So I got a call one day from this senile South African bloke who lived in Ibiza, who owned a club, this club called Ground Zero. It was called the Rock Bar, but they just rebranded it to Ground Zero. It's right in San Antonio. Don't know if you've been to Ibiza, but right in the middle of San Antonio there on the front. Got this call from him, real, like, you know, back then it was obviously like landline. So I was sort of, hey, is that Ollie Silk? I was like, oh yeah. And so he proceeded to say that we'd won this competition and they wanted us to move to Ibiza, starting like, I don't know, maybe a month after he called me for this residency. We were going to be working seven nights a week, 7 hours a night. The money was all right, but it was, you know, I mean, for 7 nights a week, 49 hours a week, it was a bit ropey, but, you know, we got our own accommodation opposite the club, obviously all food and everything paid for. So, you know, we were, what was I? It was 99, so I was 20. I just turned 20. So we were like, oh, we got to do this, got to do it. You know, we just won a competition, we've got to do this. So we said yes to it, but of course this all happened at the same time. So all of a sudden, like, okay, got to make a record, and I really want to go to Ibiza as well. So it went from like this la-di-da, let's make a few records, let's make a few songs and mess around, to like, God, we got like about 6 weeks. We've got to do 7 songs before I leave. And so we did. We had to suddenly go into work mode and actually make this record, which we did, and we did it. And literally we were finishing it. Then as I was packing to go the night before I went to Ibiza, we were finishing this record. But ultimately it was pretty much all in vain anyway, because I only spent about 8 weeks out there because it was so horrendous. I left in the end. It was so awful. I stuck it out for 8 weeks, and it was great. It was a great experience, but man, that was deep. That set, like, you know, what are you going to do? You work 7 hours a night. You finish at like 4 o'clock in the morning. You know, you've been drinking on the job every night. You know, you roll into bed at 5, wake up at 2 in the afternoon, shove some lasagna down your throat, get back to work again. I mean, it was just brutal. I just was done. And all it was entertaining a load of, like, they do bar crawls in there. So you get, there'd be no one in the club. It'd be completely empty. And then at 8 o'clock, they'd bring in the 1830s bar crawl for 90 minutes with the reps in there. So you get 200 completely trolleyed Brits coming into the club with the reps, do it because they wanted to do the games and stuff on the dance floor. So you'd have to obviously play the music that you were told to play and everything. 2 hours, absolute carnage, you know, complete carnage, vomit everywhere, drinks being spilt everywhere, like naked girls running around everywhere. And then it'd be like, right, we're on the clock, everyone out, come on, next bar. So then they'd all pile out, and then there'd be nothing, and then it'd be completely dead again. It was the most weird, surreal experience. And you might have 2 of those in a night. So you'd have an hour, and then bless them, the cleaners would come in, clean it all up, ready for the next one. And then you get the next one in, and then they'd all leave again. And then it'd be about midnight. And then all you'd have is the locals would come in, because it was known as kind of a locals bar. And they were trying to rebrand it as a kind of hip, you know, house music bar. But ultimately it was all black in there, and it was an old rock bar. It was in fact, it was the oldest club in San Antonio. It was established in like 1977 or something. And so from then on, it was all the locals, and they were miserable. And all they wanted, at the time, I loved, I loved house music. I loved big beat. I loved jazz, funk, Jamiroquai, all that stuff. All they wanted was AC/DC and like White Snake, all the classic 80s rock. So, as soon as the bar call left, we had to like go into the other CD collection, open that up, and just play a load of metal for the next 4 hours. I just had enough of it. After 6 weeks, I was done. So came back, and luckily at that point, obviously the record had been pressed and it was ready to go. So then began the jazz funk, Sugar and Silk days.
Fantastic. I was thinking back to what's my sort of smooth jazz experience as a record collector and a listener. And I was trying to think back, what was the earliest one I can remember? And I would say Mezzo 40 and Garden Party.
Yeah, man. Oh, yeah. Massive.
And I was thinking that I'll put a link to the description for that as well for people that listen to this if they can find one. But it's one of those albums that you sort of don't know is smooth jazz, but is smooth jazz at the same time, isn't it? It's a crazy album.
It is, yeah. It's kind of, it's got real elements of like kind of fusion in there, isn't it? On the album. But yeah, ultimately it's quite a happy, bouncy, of the time record. I mean, it was a big hit, Garden Party. I mean, you just can't imagine a song like that being a hit now. It would never be a hit nowadays. But even sort of 10 years after that, you would never get a song like that, really. But classic song. I love that album. It's great. And they are great. And I occasionally speak to Frederick Carlson, the guitar player, who's still doing his thing. He makes all the music for David Lloyd Spa. So he does all the David Lloyd Spa music, which has done him very well. But yeah, and I saw them in concert maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. I was heavily influenced by them because they really did have those kind of synth keyboard chops that I liked,
Yeah. I was sort of thinking, I played it again the other day because I've not heard it in many years, but my mum used to play it around the house, and I thought that would be my first sort of intro into that style of music.
Yeah.
So what was it that sort of dragged you into sort of smooth jazz rather than, dare I say, traditional jazz?
I mean, I think I just felt it was more of an extension of, it was the modern extension of the stuff that I liked from old, really. I mean, Jeff Lorber was one of my guys, really, and he went from sort of jazz fusion to jazz funk. And I mean, the monikers were made up by people at radio anyway. Yeah. But, what became smooth jazz was really just jazz funk. I wish they'd kept with that moniker. For me, it's a much more cool thing to call it. Unfortunately not, but it became smooth jazz, and it became an absolute phenomenon in the States. And so, as I say, like the guys that were making those albums, who else? Like, I guess Jeff Lorber, even like Richard Elliott, and who else? Alex Bugnon. There's quite a few players who really started in the 80s who then moved into that genre. So by the sort of late 90s, I was very aware of that music, but it wasn't really that popular over here. And it was still called jazz funk over here. And I think the whole acid jazz thing that happened over here was our version of smooth jazz over there. Because when I talk about Jamiroquai over there, they know it, but it wasn't a phenomenon like it was in Europe. Like our whole acid jazz, Corduroy and Incog and those guys was just so huge here. That was our version, I think, of the phenomenon that was smooth jazz over there. And actually, in the end, that's kind of not what drove a wedge, but that's what separated me and Danny Sugar and Silk, is that he was very much more a Jamiroquai and acid jazz and funky jazz guy, and I'd started to move further into the smooth realm. And I think that's probably why we moved away from doing any more records. But yeah, I think I just found like early 2000s, I found myself, and as I say, I was looking at it and thinking like, this is a big deal in the States. Like, I actually would love to be a part of this, not least from a financial and a creative point of view. Like, this is actually huge. Like, the radio stations over there are playing this stuff to death. The few people that I've reached out to, I reached out to Jeff Lorber very early on and Dave Cos very early on and sent them some demos, and they were like, this is great, but, you're still young and it still needs a bit of refining and blah, blah, blah. But, even then I was a bit like, and, these guys have got very, very good careers and I want a piece of this if I can.
Amazing. The flip side to the Jamiroquai thing you were saying then, I think would be Steely Dan. I think Steely Dan were huge in the States, that were sort of smooth jazz, if you like, to a degree, with Asia, the Asia album. And then in the UK, they're either really well known by people that love them, like me, or people don't know who they are. And they're amazing artists.
They are. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that yacht rock phenomenon of Kenny Loggins and Michael McDonald, Doobie Brothers and Steely Dan, I think that was really a tip. It sounds so American, that stuff, doesn't it? It really is. Me, that plus the Eagles really sums up America for me in that period of time. And yeah, perhaps didn't translate as well over here. It wasn't like that sound. They were still pretty big over here, but nothing like it was the phenomenon in America.
Just the chords they used, the jazz chords, and the way they approach it. To me, there was no difference to the smooth jazz in the UK to them, and they didn't really get.
Yeah, you're right. You got to say, like a band like Shack Attack, for instance, they surely were very. I'm sure Bill Sharp was very influenced by Donald Fagen's chords and approach, as he would have been like Larry Carlton or any of those guys. So yeah, I think we took elements of it, but you probably agree, like the whole Brit Funk thing of Shack Attack and I don't know who else, like Brass Construction and can't think of any now, but that kind of thing. Light of the World, Beggar and Co. That was sort of smooth jazz funk, but it was very British sound. We really did, we changed it and we made it into a British sound, which was interesting. So it became a thing on its own. Level 42, great example.
Yeah.
It became a thing on its own. It wasn't American sounding; it was a bit more raw than that. And so, once again, no one really knows Level 42 in the States, particularly apart from the real music buffs. But they're just a massive band in Europe and the UK.
If it's okay, I'm going to tell you my quick Steely Dan story, if that's all right.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah.
I've seen, in my lifetime, I've probably seen 2,000 plus gigs, because I was at gigs.
Yeah.
I went to see Steely Dan about 15 years ago, totally stoked. They're my favourite band, apart from the Beatles. And that's the first gig I've been to where there was a stage invasion.
Really?
Yeah. Some guy got running around behind them, drunk.
You remember where it was?
Hammersmith Apollo, I think.
Oh, was it? Yeah. Odeon as it was back then, I suppose.
Yeah. And it's the only time I've ever, of all the bands I've seen AC/DC and Metallica. Yeah, that was the one.
My God. I bet they didn't know what to do.
No, Donald Fagen was just looking about, like, what's
yeah. I can't imagine he's the most, sort of dynamic mover. He's probably just like, okay, I'll just sit here until this goes away.
Yeah, it was amazing. You've released 7 albums up to date, including In Real Life, that came out this year.
Yeah.
How do you approach an album when you sort of come to it? Do you have an idea in mind for maybe a narrative story, or do you just write some music and so they sound quite nice together, or do you have a process that you go through?
I wish I could say it was as romantic as sort of, me dreaming up a concept for an album. It's not, unfortunately. It is more like, it's time to write some music. The thing is, some people, it takes like 4 years for me to turn around an album, which is way too long, and I'm gonna be a bit quicker in future, I think. But it is that, there's always writing going on. There's always ideas knocking around. But they never really develop into a full song. So I'll continually go back and I'll look at them, because I might be in a different frame of mind. I might go, okay, I've got 15 little ideas that don't go anywhere. Oh, actually, I quite like that one. Maybe I can expand that one into a full song, and then ultimately, you get the album that way. I think once it starts to grow, once you got sort of 5 or 6 songs, maybe you can carve out a sort of vibe for it. I actually think this most recent album has the most of a most single character and vibe to it than maybe previous albums have. I don't know why that's happened, but it's kind of a bit more spacey than my previous albums. So hence why we've got this sort of in real life fantasy reality sort of lyrical thing going through some of the songs. I think whether it was an accident, I don't know, but it just it fitted that sort of slightly spacier vibe.
So, are you, when you come up with ideas, are you sort of the person that will walk down the road and go, oh, hang on a minute, and get a pen or speak it to your phone, or do you sort of sit down and go, right, I'm going to write now for half an hour and be very strict with it?
Very occasionally, something will come where I'll voice record it, but I can't sing particularly well, so it would have to be like a very, very poor quality version of like a little melody or something. But that's quite rare. Used to do that more when I was young. Now I think it's much more of just like sit at the piano and just improvising for a bit, and then you might, okay, I quite like that, okay, and then can develop it to a couple of other chords or something like that. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is like I'll sit down and make a rhythm track, a groove track of some sort. I'll pick some different drums I haven't used for a while or I've never used or something like that, find a little loop or something, just something that gets my juices flowing. And then maybe I'll write a bass line on top of that, and then find some chords, and then sort of basic groove is there. That's a good way to do it. But what tends to happen is what I said a minute ago, is like, then you've got this really nice little, 25-second piece of music, but you just don't know where to go with it. It's a great little loop, and you've built it all up, and you've got little instruments. You're like, yeah, man, that's funky. But then it's like, oh, I don't know where to take that. And then it ends up sitting on the shelf. And then I find it quite difficult to go back to songs if I've started them and developed them. So it's actually a bit better to try on the piano to actually flesh out exactly what you want and where it's going to go as well. Right, almost sort of semi-arrange it to start with. Okay, so that's that. This could be the bridge. Okay, cool. And then this could be the chorus. Get all that down and then work the grooves and production around that.
It's been... Obviously, I knew I was going to speak to you today, so I've been listening to your back catalogue. I've not been, as I said earlier, I've not been a huge smooth jazz person, but listen to your catalogue. What's been really lovely about your albums is on each one, at least somewhere, there's a vocalist singing a track as well. So it's a lovely way of just gently, it's instrumental, but every now and again there's a vocal track, which sort of then hooks you back in for someone that's not au fait in that world, which is a lovely move. Looking Glass, especially on your last album, I think was amazing.
Oh, great. Thank you, man. Yeah. I'm pleased with that. It's slightly bit of a departure for me stylistically. But once again, that was a great example of like those chords are slightly unusual. The chordal arrangement is slightly unusual, especially for me, but like that was me actually deliberately, right, I'm not going to write any groove. I can feel the way these chords are going to go, but I really want to make sure that they're all correct. And I've got a nice song before I worry about whether it's going to be this drum, that bass line. And that was a great example of that. And then I actually came away and was like, that's a really nice full song for a vocalist to write a good top line over, rather than giving a vocalist like, well, I've got this little idea, but I don't know about this bit, and like, can you maybe write a little hook over that, and then we'll see where it goes. It was like, no, there's the song, there's a key change in there, there's a beginning, there's an ending, there's an intro, blah, blah, blah. Everything's in position. And I think she really, when I sent it to Rebecca, who I did the song with, Rebecca Jade, she very much was over the moon that she had a full arrangement to work with, because it just made her life a lot easier.
I know you've just dropped your new album, and I really, really love it. I think it's a great album. For someone, like I said, to just put his foot into this world, I really enjoyed it. Because, you can get that sort of, like, people say smooth jazz, and you think, really? Because of your production and your writing, it really was, it's an enjoyable listen. It's brilliant. There were links to it in the bottom there. Maybe moving forward, would you maybe focus on more vocal-related songs, or is it mainly about instrumentals for yourself?
I wouldn't rule it out. I have. It's always been on the back burner for me to do more of a vocal soul album. I don't know about soul, but yeah, just more of a funk soul vocal led album. Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out at all. But as I said, if I'm only doing one album every 4 years, ain't going to happen. So I would need to pull my finger out and be able to work. I mean, in an ideal world, I'd love to have a few projects going on every year. But for some reason, I get waylaid by lots of other things, as you well know. There's so many. I've kind of, I have a lot of strings to my bow, so to speak. So, not only have I got to travel a lot and do shows in the States, which take up a lot of time, both ends. Then you've got the jet lag at one end, jet lag at the other end. You've got to make sure all the music's intact and that your show is good. All that stuff takes time. If I play keyboards for other people, which I'm trying to calm down on, but that's something that's been a big part of my career as well, is being a sideman, playing keyboards for other artists. So of course learning music takes a long time, and then doing the shows themselves. I've got a few side hustles in the studio, production hustles and things like that. So like it's one of those things. It's just prioritizing what I need to prioritize. But I think after finishing this record, I said to myself, it can't be 4 years again, because it was 2016, 2020, 2024, it's just too long. It's too long. And people who started when I started they're on their 14th album, and there I am on 7. And I want to do more music. So I think, looking forward, I'd like to diversify my catalogue a little bit, for sure.
Maybe you could call your next album 4 years later.
Yeah. Worth the wait or something like that.
If someone was coming into your catalogue over your 7 albums, what album do you think would be the best album for someone to start at? If you sort of said, you know what, this is where I was sort of still discovering who I was as a musician and a writer, where would you go, you know what, actually start at this one, not the last one or the first one?
I think probably I did an album in 2010 called All We Need, which I often go back to, and I pretty much would say is my favourite album that I've ever made. Something was just really right about the production of that album, especially, but also the songwriting, but especially the production, just really sounded great. I worked with some different players. I did some stuff in LA, at studios in LA, and it just really made a difference to that record. So yeah, All We Need, I think would be a great starting point. The albums. I mean, I think each album has got its own, has definitely got its own little character, as well. I said earlier. I think there's an album before that called The Limits to the Sky, which is a bit more raw and a bit more unusual. And I was still at the time, I was 27, I think, where I would experiment a bit more, because it wasn't like, oh, I've got to do these songs for the radio. I must make sure this is radio friendly, that's radio friendly, and all that. It was much more like, let's just experiment and just do some kind of crazy old pastiche 80s, 808 drum type stuff. And there's a bit of a different mix in there. So Limits to the Sky and All We Need, I think people should go and check out.
There'll be links for that in the bottom. Amazingly, I love to say that you've released 7 albums and you're touring extensively. That's brilliant. Are you worried about the rise of AI? Do you think AI is going to be a problem?
Yes, I do actually. Yeah. I haven't given it massive amount of thought in terms of musically, but some of the stuff I am seeing, I mean, for me, it's just going to be an extension of already the erosion of the music industry at the hands of technology in general. I mean, you can't argue that tech has made music so accessible, which is great. But on the other hand, when something is so accessible, everybody can do it to a standard without working so hard to become that musician, or to become that producer, or whatever it is. You got all these tools that help you, means that a lot more people can do that, and then you've got this soup of everybody's just making music, and it's harder to wheedle out the quality stuff from the not so good stuff. And also, I think, unfortunately, over years, everyone's expectations, every generation's expectations of music, come down slightly every generation. So now it's acceptable to listen to some of the absolute, what I think is rubbish that's in the top 10 streaming chart. It's very poorly written. It's pretty poorly produced. It's very, it's way too simplistic. I know I sound like an old fuddy duddy, and I'm sure every generation goes through this. My dad and your dad could have been sitting here saying exactly the same thing in the 70s, and how rich was the 70s music, but they could have been sitting there saying the same thing, or our granddads could have been saying the same thing. So I'm well aware that it's just a generational thing every time. But if you look at, I mean, Rick Beato, I don't know if you follow, watch Beato videos. He's great at really, articulating the theoretical watering down of music now, and it is true. Like harmonically, it's so drab. There's no chromaticism, or there's very little chromaticism in music anymore. You don't hear chromatic lines anymore. It's what we would call very, very flat diatonic music. It's like simple chords within one simple key center. You don't often get key changes anymore. So we don't need to do that. Why bother with a key change? We'll just stick on the same 4 chords. But, they said the same about rock and roll. They said the same about 50s, late 50s rock and roll. Well, there's only 4 chords. What is this nonsense, So I do understand it's cyclical. But anyway, I've gone off topic a little bit. I just my old man rant there. But I think AI is gonna. It's just going to be another thing that lets anybody make creative art, without putting much effort into it. And where's the coolness in that? Maybe what it will do is it will push even. There was that thing like kind of 15 years ago where the table started to turn, and like live music started to become what people really wanted to hear because they knew it was human and they knew it was real. And recorded music just became this sort of commodity that backed up people's live performances. And I think maybe AI will be almost a nail in the coffin for recorded music, and it will just drive that live thing. What I do like about technology is that, you can flick Instagram on and you can see live videoed performances of some of the best young musicians in the world playing their instruments, like within a touch of a button. You've got some of the best, I don't know, anything from violin, sax, keyboard players, like absolutely like smashing it. And I think that's great because they've taken time to learn their instrument, and that's real, So yeah, it's ever evolving, but I do worry it's gonna take our jobs.
Well, like you say though, it might force all the live venues to open, so it might be one of those.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but who knows what's the nth degree of AI? Like, it could actually be a part of a live show. I mean, we already see that singers use auto-tune on live shows all the time. And the other that I don't know. Did you see this thing about Brian Wilson, about the Beach Boys?
No.
There was a controversy about how the a cappella. Now I don't remember what song it was. Was it Nobody Knows? He did his a cappella. They've been doing it live right throughout their tour. There's a guy on YouTube. I'm not going to remember his name, but he's a great musical commentator, British guy, and he was comparing 2 shows from 2 different iPhone cameras, and that he come to the conclusion that Brian Wilson is miming that complete a cappella opening to that particular song. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure some of your listeners will know which song it was. And I just thought, wow, I mean, like that, and he's miming it, but they've got it all there on track. It's Milli Vanilli, but it's been accepted, whereas Milli Vanilli were like the scapegoats of using ducking tracks. Everyone's at it, Yeah. And that you've got that, and you've got auto-tune, of course, like where it was just used for recorded music. Now it's so fast, there's no latency to it. It's real time. So you have auto-tune, all those Britain's Got Talent shows that everyone's singing, as far as I can hear it straight away. Like there's always a bit of auto-tune on those vocals, Yeah. So then it's just like, oh man, where does it go? Like where's it? You're going to have a live performance. It's not really live, It's live, but it's been fed through, quantizing and auto-tuning.
I think the danger is going to be, it's a brilliant idea now. I think the danger is the ABBA avatars. I think one day there'll be an AI band that will be avatars, and they will sell millions. It will sell millions. And
yeah. And like actually, no one's written the music. It's been written by a computer, completely performed by avatars. Wow, yeah, that will be very interesting. Maybe, I mean, I have to say, like I've listened to a few AI like mashup things. It comes up with some otherworldly stuff. I mean, stuff that people would never come up with, and that's quite interesting.
Mm.
Even like, I think I watched like Never Gonna Give You Up being put through AI and, you know, degraded through AI like 20 times, and what it comes up with, it's like, it's insane. Like, they're noises that you've never, that aren't really, it's a little bit, I mean, it's much like AI, you know, video, like all that merging video, people have all got 6 fingers and like, you know, and nothing really makes sense to your eyes, but that's what, you know, that's where we're at. But it's like the musical version of that. Doesn't really make sense, but actually there's something there, you know.
Amazing. I mean, fortunately, you're still touring. So where can people catch you on tour if they wanted to find you?
My new website's going to go live tomorrow, actually, which is cool, which is just www.olliesilk.com, OLISILK.com. We've been working on just a new website. It's going to go live tomorrow. If anyone wants one of the new CDs, there's a link to buy a signed copy, and I'll send it out from here. All my tour dates will be on there. They're mainly in the US, almost exclusively in the US, because I just go back and forth. I mean, it's just that's my life now, going back and forth to the US. But I love it, and it's great that I can play in some of these places. I never thought as a youngster I would ever get the chance to even play in the States, let alone tour there every year. A few things over here. There's a new club opening up in Stratford, actually. I don't know if you know about this, called Soul Mama, and it's opening up in Stratford. I never thought I'd see a soul jazz club opening in Stratford, but there we go. So that's opening, I think, in like this September, I think, or August, September. And I'm looking to do a night there on November the 7th, but again, I'll put it on website when it's all confirmed. So that'll be a nice UK date. And yeah, I'll put some. There's always a few floating around. There's a few clubs. There's not much for the music that we make. You've got Pizza Express Jazz Club in Soho, which puts on a lot of this kind of stuff. There's a place called the Cliffs Pavilion in Southend-on-Sea. Yeah, and I, in fact, have just played there, so you just missed me. Just played there, but I'll be back there once a year. That's a nice little place down in the Maritime Rooms, like underneath the actual pavilion. That's a cool club. There's one called the Hampton Hub, which people should check out if they're in West London, in right near Hampton Court Palace there. That's a nice club. They do a lot of, they put Shack Attack on there and a lot of sort of good jazz funk tribute stuff. So yeah, there's a few places over here, but yeah, like I say, mainly focus on the States, which is where, if anyone wants to travel out and see me, they're more than welcome. Come and have a vacation.
Well, until we get the Ollie Silk avatar, go and see him live wherever you can. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting today. So thanks so much for your time. I really enjoyed chatting.
Absolutely, Robbie. Sorry if I waffled on about a lot of things, but you know, no, I really appreciate it, man. It's great to talk about music.